In this video, I'm going to share with you a number of insights on how to best brand yourself as an exceptional candidate. And before getting into the tips, I'm going to share with you the context of why I believe shooting such content is important and for who. So the context is that, at least in my experience, high-performing companies are being quite picky when hiring new people these days. Maybe in simple terms, unless you are an exceptional candidate, they aren't likely interested in working with you. This one compared to previous years when hiring was mainstream, so to speak, right? And the other important bit of advice is this advice is targeted for people who would like to take a bit more risk or to do new stuff in these job interviews. Of course, with the risk there comes the rewards, but you should understand the context and to whom this advice is addressed, right? Second thing you could do here to differentiate yourself from other candidates would be to share your story bank in advance prior to your interview. And when I'm saying share it, I do not necessarily mean to share it with non-important stakeholders in the process. I'd rather share it with the main stakeholders in the process in a bit to convince them, hey, I really know what you're doing. I could even share with you this in advance and we could discuss this further eventually during our interview, right? Also, I don't see much value in sharing your story bank with the recruiter, for instance, right? So I'm talking about a final interview round, right? So this was the first thing. Share your story bank with them prior to your interview. See what gives. The second thing, this relates to putting together a great show during the interview. And in normal circumstances, it is advised that you take your time to answer an interview question. Listening skills to really understand, to really find what's the best story to answer the given question and so on and so forth. This is a perfectly fine advice. However, if you want to take more risk, you should know that you might come across and you will come across as more convincing if you answer their questions quickly on the spot without delay, right? It is, of course, one of the common reasons why people make monumental mistakes in job interviews, but it's also a method to taking a little bit more risk, but with the reward of sounding a little bit more convincing in your performance, right? This was number 2. Number 3, this refers to everyone these days templates their answers to questions in the star format, which used to be something interesting maybe a number of years ago, but now if everyone does it, then probably if you wanted to differentiate yourself from other candidates, you could stay away from that template. You could come up with something more ingenious, and you could still communicate your ideas clearly. There are plenty of ways to go around this, but usually my main advice would be not to template your answers in any given format. But if you want a number of advice, you could dramatize it a little bit more, or you could use the reverse star format, and so on. All sorts of variations, but be creative in the way you communicate your answers in a bit to differentiate yourself from other candidates as well. Number 4, and this could sound counterintuitive for many of you. If for any reason you cannot prepare for the interview and it a week or even sooner, then postpone your interview. Right? So you'll be amazed on the number of people who fail to prepare interviews and number of people who know they won't be able to prepare the interviews but still get into interviewing with these high-performing companies for a lot of money, and they expect, that, hey, sometimes it could work for them. In my experience, it never works. So this is why I'm actually providing with such an advice to postpone your job interview if you won't be able to prepare it. Right? Most of the time, companies are not desperate to hire someone as quickly as possible, and therefore, have a bit of leverage, especially during these times, if timing isn't of essence, you could as well postpone it, so you could prepare it properly and eventually make a great performance. Right? Number 5 here. Pick your fights carefully. Okay, so it's no secret that certain interviewers matter a lot less than others. There are some key stakeholders, decision makers who are really interested in screening you and putting pressure on you. And the reasoning for saying the reason why I'm saying this is because it's usually impossible for someone to perform at their best consistently for 5 hours straight. Right? So this is why I'm advising you, like, hey, if you know that some people will be more important than others during that interview process, then you should focus on making the best performance and eventually also using your best stories with them. I found this also something which is advisable and a technique which works. Or, in some companies, Amazon, for instance, they have introduced the option to split your final interview rounds over the course of 2 days. Exactly on the same reasoning that it's very hard to be consistently performing at your best for 5 hours straight or however long your interview is. Right? So this would be the number 5 advice. So this would be the main thing I want to talk about here. And last but not least, I wanted to give you a number of scenarios which may sound tempting, but in my experience, there's nothing really tempting there. The first scenario is, to some candidates, companies advertise openings as if we create an opportunity for you. We create a job description. We create a role for you, right? In my opinion, this type of invitation doesn't make you any more special than a normal or regular candidate, because they will still put a lot of pressure on you. And in my experience, it's the likeliness you'll get hired is the same as if you'd applied for a normal job. Furthermore, something even more dangerous, in my opinion, is when during this initial screening process, the recruiter, for instance, would say, hey, I believe you should be interviewing for a more important type of role. This is again a scenario which, in my opinion, does not work. I mean, not in my opinion, in my experience, it does not work. And furthermore, I have enough experience to tell you that it works slightly differently with these things. In other words, if, for instance, you interview for level 6 and you interview really well, they will extend you an offer for level 7 if they think that's appropriate. However, if they invite you if you make a screening round for level 5 or level 6, and then the recruiter says, no, apply for level 7 because that's where you're closest, then it's highly unlikely you'll get that interview for level 7. You'll wow them this much that they will be convinced. So rather, so I guess the advice I'm giving you here, stay on the level that you think suits you best, not the most interesting type of level, not the most senior type of position. Better interview for the level 5 or 6 and then get up level because you wowed everyone on the panel, rather than to interview for a role that is not you, that is too high for what you have, right? Another common scenario where people take the bite with these things is they really like me and it's just a formality, right? So just because the recruiter likes or the hiring manager likes you before interviewing you during those final rounds, in my experience, it means nothing, and even I would rather take it with a grain of salt in all this experience, because this makes you feel too comfortable and eventually derail your interview prep and your performance during the interview. So it doesn't work this way. Same thing goes if the recruiter says, don't worry, it's just a formality. It happens all the time, should be said. Okay, same goes if you know the people who are going to interview you, even during the final rounds. It doesn't really make a difference in the interview outcomes. Okay, and I've even had instances where people were provided with the questions in advance, or they were told these would be the questions they could expect during the interview. It was not the case. Those were not the questions, and needless to say, the outcome wasn't the right one. So I believe this combination of taking a bit of risk, do things a bit differently, in a bit to really sell yourself as the exceptional candidate, but combined, with down-to-earth approaches, such as applying for the actual role you're qualified for and not taking the bite to interview for a more senior role than you'd like, or not taking it too seriously when they tell you, hey, we really like you, it's just going to be a formality. These types of behaviors, I found that provide the candidates with the best level of success in this job interview. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.